Welcome to the Rusted Garden Homestead. Today I'm going to answer 20 questions about vegetable gardening. Questions I get asked all the time. There's also a lot of new people starting gardens right now, so I wanted to just put the answers to common questions all in one space. If you want to add in a couple of comments, help people out, that would be great. There are a lot of people thinking about starting vegetable gardens right now. First question I get is, how big should a garden be? Well, it can be as big as you want, but I recommend starting with something small. This is a good size. There are 4 beds in there. These beds are 4 feet by 4 feet. If you're going to frame out your beds, you want to keep it about a 4-foot width because your arms are 2 feet. So you can walk around the beds and then reach in and tend to the beds as you wish. You can put all the good stuff, amendments right in the middle, but by keeping it a 4 feet width, you never have to step into your garden. This is a great size if you're just starting, but you can just start with one of these, a 4-foot by 4-foot bed or a 4-foot by 8-foot bed. And you can also grow in containers. We'll talk more about that. How much sun does my garden need? It's going to need at least 6 hours of direct sunlight. So the sun rays should be able to hit wherever your garden's going to be. The best way to do that is go outside at 10 a.m., 12 p.m., 2 p.m., and 4 p.m. and just see if the sun is hitting your space where you want to have the garden. It doesn't have to be continuous 6 hours, but it really has to be 6 hours of direct sunlight. This garden here gets 8 to 10. If you can get 8 hours, that would be great. Now, this is a large garden. I have all kinds of garden beds in there. You don't have to spend money building framed beds or buying something like this, the metal containers. You can just start with what I would recommend if it's your first garden. Just dig in the ground. Here's an example of just an earth bed. There's of course a raised bed going through the middle, but it's about 3 feet wide, trenched along the sides, and then I just mound the soil into the middle of the bed. There's a bale of peat moss spread through that to mix into the soil to really help it out. We'll talk about fertilizers and stuff like that, but if you're just starting, nothing wrong with growing in the earth. In fact, this is one of my favorite beds right here. Different framed beds, different raised beds, as I was talking about. Always keep them 4 feet, a 4-foot width. I grow in containers over there. The bottoms are cut out. It's just a nice way to contain plants. I do my pepper plants in those. And if you don't have the space, again, this is a large garden. Don't start this size, start smaller. If you don't have the space, you can grow in flower boxes, you can grow in containers. If you're going to grow in containers, you want containers that are at least about 10 gallons in size. You can go a little bit smaller, but when you go smaller with the containers, you have to water a lot more. These are 22-gallon containers. If you decide to container garden, make sure there are drainage holes. Containers always need drainage holes, or they're going to fill up with water. It's going to rot the roots of your plants, and you're not going to have a good season, because you're going to have plants that start off great, but as the root systems get into the bottom of the container where the water's sitting, the roots are going to rot, the plants are going to die off. Now, I know I said you need 6 hours or more of sunlight, but the other question I get that goes along with that is, where do I place my garden? You want to put it in an area that drains well and isn't going to fill up with water. So a flat area. Best way to figure that out if you're not sure. I mean, after a big rainstorm, thunderstorm, if the water's gone, you're fine, but you can always dig a hole about 12 inches deep, fill it full of water from a hose. If it drains out in 20 minutes or so, you're good to go. You just don't want sitting water in a garden area that you select. So here's a new garden that I just built, and it's actually 16 feet by 16 feet. You don't have to put up fencing if you don't want to. Don't get overwhelmed with thinking you have to do everything right away. You can just pick out a 16-foot by 16-foot space. A 4x4, 12-inch raised bed back there, 6x4, and another 4x4 right in here. Why do you use raised beds? Well, raised beds help you deal with, maybe you have earth that's not the best, it's heavy clay, lots of stones. By building up the sides 12 inches, you can put in all of your amendments, all of your garden soil, fertilizers right into a space. Saves you some money, gives you a great growing space, and again, you can come in and tend it as you wish. Here are some of the bag products. I have a full video on this. If you want to check that out, I'll put a link in. When you go into the big box stores and you're deciding what to buy, you're going to see all these different bag products. And number one, this is the most expensive way to fill your raised beds. You can literally spend hundreds of dollars. So let's just talk about two things. You're going to see bags of humus and manure, cow manure, compost and manure. Don't put those things, if you're just starting out, on the top of your soil, because they're in different stages of breaking down or composting. They can take nitrogen from your plant. So if you're going to use the manures that are bagged, bring them home, let them sit in your yard 60 days, 90 days, let them break down before you mix them into the topsoil. Or do what I do, is I just put a bag down in the bottom and then I put my earth on top of that. The whole key to this is that just because it says compost, it doesn't mean that it's fully broken down. And if you mix these manures into the top 4 inches, 6 inches of your soil, they can compete with your plants for nitrogen and they're just not going to grow well. If you're buying bagged mixes to fill your beds, I'm just going to tell you what to buy. You would buy the garden soil. Look for the bag that says garden soil. It's kind of expensive, but that's what will work best, and you can amend that over time with better stuff. Don't buy topsoil. Don't buy premium topsoil. It's just not good quality, and it's going to dry out, and it's going to be sometimes really hard, almost like concrete till the rain comes. You also don't need to fill your beds with potting mix or another product called raised bed mix. That's just more expensive than your garden soil. Hope that makes sense. I make mine. I take 50% earth from my yard and mix it with 50% peat moss, and that pretty much makes the garden soil that you're buying in a bag, and it's like, I don't know, half the cost, if not even a quarter of the cost. But I'll show you a bale of peat moss as we're walking around. What are cool weather crops? Cool weather crops can take a frost. They usually go out as the season is still cooler, obviously, coming out of winter. They like 45 degrees soils, 45 degrees Fahrenheit. They can take a light frost, and they're really made up of the greens: kale, collards, some bulbs, radishes, beets, turnips, arugula, our leafy greens, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower. I think you get the idea. You can look up on the internet cool weather crops. That will tell you, give you a whole list of what you would get out into the garden first. Your warm weather crops, I don't have a whole lot out here because we're still getting frosts at night, but the warm weather crops like 55, 60 degree soil. They like warm days. Here are some examples. Tomatoes, which I did put in early. Tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, squash, zucchini, cucumbers are all your warm weather crops. So you do plant crops in stages, and if you do an internet search, that will let you know what are warm weather crops, what are cool weather crops. I also have videos on that. Now, what are arches for? So I have a couple different arches here, different kinds of trellises. You can spend money, you can get cattle panel, you can make something bigger. You can get 2 stakes, put some string across, and it's for growing vertically. You can really create whatever you want. By growing a cucumber straight up the trellis, you're going to save a lot of space because they're not going to be traveling all across the ground. So vertical gardening or using trellises is a way to get more vegetables and more production out of your garden. And here's a couple examples that you can use and you can create. Cattle panel can go in the arches. You can even just use poles or posts. You can build stuff on the side. You can weave tomatoes up through there. You can grow beans and cucumbers up that. So trellising is a great way to save space. I get a question a lot. What can I grow in containers? And the answer is you can grow anything in containers. These are 10-gallon fabric pots. So I would recommend 10-gallon pots. In a 10-gallon pot, you can grow 1 cucumber plant, 1 squash plant, 1 zucchini plant, a tomato plant, 2 pepper plants, all kinds of greens, 2 kale plants, tons of lettuces. There are probably anywhere from 8 to 10 peas in there right now with arugula seeds. So a 10-gallon pot is a good way to go with having a container garden. It gives you a lot of size, and you can grow just about anything in there. The whole key to container gardening is making sure that you have adequate moisture, which means you're going to have to water sometimes every day when it gets really hot out. You don't want the root systems of your plants to dry out even once, or it will damage the growth of the plant. You also need to feed them that's the other question I get, is how often do I feed my container plants? Well, when they're small, the plants are small, maybe every 14 or 21 days with a water-soluble fertilizer. We'll go over fertilizers in a little bit. When they're larger, you want to be feeding them every 7 to 14 days depending on what type of plant they are. Tomato plants, squash, zucchini, cucumber plants take a lot of nutrients out of the soil, so you're going to have to be adding in more of the water-soluble fertilizers more often when the plants are bigger. Now we talked about growing up trellises, but you can also grow in vertical towers. And what is that? Tower gardening, or growing in basically stacked containers. They have their own potting mix in the containers, and you can grow vertically. That's all my different cool weather crops, lots of lettuces in there, some beet greens. Over here I have kale, herbs coming up, and tower gardening really saves you space. You fill them up with a potting mix, you tuck the plants into the pockets, and you can pack a whole lot of growth into really a 2 foot by 2 foot, 3 foot by 3 foot footprint. I always get the question, how do I stop squirrels from wreaking havoc in my garden? So the only way that I found to really manage them is to trap them humanely and release them 3 to 5 miles away from your place, from your garden. So if you have damage coming from squirrels, there's not much you can do. They're very clever. They'll get under fencing, they'll go over fencing, they'll get under fabric cover. They will get to what they want to get to. You have to trap and release them. Rabbits are different. Rabbits are very skittish. In my garden, I have wire fencing all the way around to the bottom of the earth. It keeps the rabbits out, except when I forget and leave the gate open. But if you can't do that, or you don't want to do that, you can get fencing. This is vinyl covered fencing, and you just cut out a section that would cover your bed wherever the plants are coming up. Let me show you what I mean. So this is the fencing. It's almost hard to see, that's why I like the green. And you just cut it out to length, and you drop it down over your plants, prop it up a little bit, leave a couple inches under there. Your lettuces can grow up through here. A lot of your plants can grow up through here. If you need to get to the crops, you can lift it up. Rabbits don't like walking on stuff like this. You can also use chicken wire. They're not going to go under it. As I said, they're very skittish, so this will keep rabbits away. What's the cheapest way to fill raised beds? And the answer is to buy a 3-foot cubic bale of peat moss. Depending where you live, it'll be anywhere from $12 to $14. If you don't want to use peat moss, you can use cocoa coir. But a general recipe is 50% equal parts, 50% peat moss, 50% of earth that you dig up from your area. Mix it together, fill your beds. It will save you a lot of money. But you can pick up the bales of peat moss a lot more cheaply than going and buying 10, 20 bags of gardening soil or potting mix. Make your own, you'll save a lot of money. Can I use manures in my garden? Absolutely yes. And like I was saying about the bag products, if you're going to use animal manures, you have to make sure they're fully composted down. This is 2-year-old horse manure. You couldn't tell by standing here. There's no odor, no scent. It's fully composted, fully broken down, and that means when you use it in a garden, it's just going to give back to your plants. The other question I get is, how do I use manures in a garden? Best way to use them, again, fully broken down. If you're not sure, you would put your manure down in the fall when you're not using your beds anymore, about 2 inches, 3 inches across the top, and just let it break down over the winter and fall, and come spring, mix it in. If it's fully broken down, you could do the same thing in the fall if you want, just do your chore then. Or in the spring before you start planting, because it's fully composted, drop your 2 or 3 inches on the top, mix it into your earth, and you're good to go. The other way I use manures is I do a top dressing mid-season. Here in Maryland, that's around middle of July. For my growing tomatoes, cucumbers, zucchini, squash, I sprinkle maybe 1 inch of the manures around the plants, maybe 6 inches away from the base of the plant, and just let that sit there. When it rains, it'll get washed into the soil, give your plants a little bit of a boost. Do I have to start all my seeds in seed trays or in containers? And the answer is no. The reason you would do that is if you have a shorter growing season, you want to get a jump on the season, you can start them in cups and containers. It's a lot of fun, but you don't have to do that. You can buy transplants, you can seed directly into the ground. Do I have to start seeds indoors under grow lights? These were all planted under grow lights, but the answer to that is no. So these are all plants that have been started without grow lights. You can start them in seed cells, in cups, in flats. You can put them into these containers, and basically this is a form of winter sowing. You just move these outside when the temperatures are 40 degrees or more, and then you bring them at night if the temperatures are going to drop below 40 degrees. Don't leave them out if it's freezing out, of course. When you bring them inside, they appreciate the warmth of the night, helps the root systems, they grow really well. And then you just bring them out the next day, and you can have transplants just like this without setting up grow lights. All right, so let's go over the fertilizers real quick. You have two types. You have soluble types, which means they're readily and immediately available to your plant, and these are usually the fertilizers you mix into a gallon of water. There's all kinds of different products. They're called water-soluble fertilizers, and you use them to immediately feed and take care of your plants. And this is what I would use in the containers every 7 to 14 to 21 days, depending on what you're growing. So you have the water-soluble types, like fish emulsion. The box products are usually the water-soluble types. And then you have your insoluble or your granular types, and they come in all kinds of different bags. For example, this is one that is called a raised bed plant food. Don't go by the names. All these fertilizers are pretty much the same. They're insoluble. They're usually in granular form. You can find blood meal, bone meal, chicken meal, cottonseed meal, all kinds of different organic products in granular form. And insoluble means that they get used, sprinkled on top of your garden, in the planting hole, mix it into the earth. Soil biology has to break it down and sort of digest it to keep it simple. And then it changes the form of the fertilizer into a form of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium that plants can use, and then your plants can absorb it into the roots. So the insoluble granular type are kind of like a slow release fertilizer that feeds slowly over time, and the water soluble type fertilizers are more of a quick release that you can feed your plants and take care of your plants feed your plants more quickly by using that type of fertilizer. All right, that's the end of the questions. So now let's go out into the garden, and I'm just going to show you different examples of beds and things that you can use in your garden that you may apply to your garden. Now, these are metal raised beds that I got online. I had to put them together. They were kind of inexpensive. They were on sale. The company's not around anymore. But you can set up raised beds just like this. I just dropped them right onto the grass, put cardboard down, and these are actually filled with shredded hardwood. There's a whole system to use it that way. But you can put your garden soils in there. That's a cold frame. You can build things that you can grow over the winter. There's a clear plastic piece that goes over the top, and those plants did really well through the winter here, and you can see how well they're growing. These are metal raised beds. These were purchased at Tractor Supply store. There's no bottoms in them, and they're kind of expensive. They were like $150. But I have my garden set up as a sort of a teaching garden. That's something you can use too. Fire rings, you can find them in different places on Amazon. No bottoms in those either. You always want to have the bottoms open so your root systems grow into the ground. Different kinds of trellising. That is a wire mesh for construction. I go to Home Depot and I just pick out different things there, and I kind of repurpose them for the garden. That is a shelving rack from Home Depot. I'll be growing plants up that. They work really well. They're vinyl coated. Flower boxes, containers, you can see down there, you can grow in those. Now you can't grow tomatoes and big plants in a shallow flower box, but you can do your leafy greens. These are all kinds of different raised beds. They're more like framed beds because anything that's 6 inches or lower, not quite a raised bed, but the whole principle is the same, that you just frame it out, keep it a 4-foot dimension, put your resources in there, you can grow different things. I like the earth beds, as I talked about earlier in the video. It's real simple, easy to do. Growing radishes in there. Different kinds of trellising. Well, these are actually supports, but you can use them for trellises too, that I use for my tomato plants. Those are window wells down there. There's 2 pieces. That's what goes under your windows that are like right along the earth level, and you put them up against it, and it protects debris from falling down to where you have your lower windows. I just used 2 pieces, bolted them together, and again, that bottom is open. The plants can do what they need to do in there. These are dish racks that I get at not at Home Depot. You could get them there, but I get them at thrift stores. They're really inexpensive, maybe $1 or $2, and that's what I put over my plants to protect them from rabbits. So you get a pretty good idea of the different things that you can put in your garden, all the different trellising and stuff like that. I just want to end with saying, if you're just getting started, I've been doing this for 20 or 30 years. You don't have to have a garden by any means this size, but take the different pieces that you see, start slowly, get some confidence, have fun. Even if you have the worst year gardening, you're still going to get something. Plants want to grow, they want to give back to you. So enjoy yourself. Check out my other videos if you like. They give you more details on different things that you saw today. Stay safe. Thanks for being part of my gardening life, and I hope this video answers a lot of your questions. Thanks for watching.